Welcome to Uncharted Territories. Today I'm with Mark Nelson, who I met through Twitter. Both of us have been pretty critical, specifically of the German position on their nuclear reactors. If you are not up to the latest, they closed 3 reactors at the end of 2021, and then they have 3 more that were slated to be closed by the end of 2022. And given the war in Russia, this sounds like a very stupid idea. And so I've been pushing against it, and Mark has also been pushing against it. So we decided to chat. He's an expert in the nuclear field. And I wanted to learn from him a little bit what he's learned on the nuclear side and what he thinks about the German reactors. So my background here that's also relevant is I have a couple of masters in science in industrial engineering, and I've studied nuclear energy, among others, in grad school. But I am now a nuclear expert, the way Mark is. So that's why I want to ask your opinion, Mark. And I know you have a lot of experience on nuclear too. So what's your background?
Yeah, thanks, Tomas. I'm from Oklahoma in the United States, a land of oil and gas wells, cattle, and no nuclear plants. But I got into nuclear energy after my undergraduate education in mechanical and aerospace engineering. So I went off to Cambridge University, and they had just opened a brand new nuclear engineering master's course in preparation for Britain to return to nuclear energy. It's been very slow going, but back in 2012, there was a great deal of optimism. And so I was part of those early groups coming in expecting to build out the UK's nuclear fleet in the next few years. And then after that, I went actually not into industry, but through a roundabout course, I ended up in environmental activism and in the NGO space. Definitely not anything I ever anticipated doing, but it was a powerful education. I was over in California, in the Bay Area. So I was in Berkeley, California, working with Michael Schellenberger at his organization, Environmental Progress. Environmental Progress was sort of a renegade NGO that was focused on a different view of how environmental protection comes from. That is, it comes from prosperity that is delinked to environmental damage. One of the biggest things you can do is make your energy with tiny little devices on tiny little plots of land without consuming more than a tiny little bit of uranium fuel. So that's nuclear energy. Our problem, and one of the driving missions for founding Environmental Progress, is that nuclear plants were being attacked and were being closed around the world. Well, almost entirely in rich countries. The richest countries cutting down nuclear plants.
Japan, right after Fukushima, Germany followed suit. Before that, the UK. So, but a couple of things before this. So you did start your PhD in nuclear energy too, right? Correct?
Yes, I did. I started, but did not complete my PhD at Cambridge.
And it sounds like it's kind of a badge of honor at this point to fall from academia.
I'll take it, but I reserve the right, one, to use it as a warning story to other young researchers, and I also reserve the right, if I find a topic interesting enough and advisors interested enough, to return and get my PhD without perjuring myself by saying PhDs are stupid and I'll never get one.
And so, and it was in uranium, specifically uranium fuel. Is that right?
Right. So the PhD was modeling a nation-scale nuclear energy systems and tracking the quantity and needs of isotopes going through them. So uranium and thorium fuel, maybe plutonium fuel, and sort of determining what the best solution is for a nation based on tracking the fuel cycle. I no longer think that the fuel cycle is particularly important as a reason countries go into or exit nuclear energy. Rather, nuclear fuel cycle issues are a relatively small side issue that very rarely come to the forefront. With Germany, what we're about to talk to, Germany is going to be one of those exceptions, but it's sort of the tail on the dog. It doesn't wag the dog. And so once I realized that almost all decisions about nuclear are weird, internal intuition decisions in the hearts of big leaders, both inside and outside of governments, I lost the interest in tracking minute amounts of isotopes in order to pretend that that's a way we could make a value function to determine the correct way to build an energy system.
And it was entirely back to this, because I think it's impossible to get into these debates without going into some of these fundamentals. But I think the best way maybe to get into this is to go straight into what's happening in Germany. And obviously, the people who are going to be listening to this are going to think, given your background, given my background, that we're biased. And so I think it's fair to acknowledge this. Having studied nuclear for some time, I do think, in fact, that if you're very objective about this, it is very positive. But I want to acknowledge that this is going to be bias that people are going to have. But given that, so Germany, in the last few weeks, they have been flip-flopping around the 3 nuclear reactors that are still open. And so just a little bit of history. Back in March, the government, or April, the government issued a statement. It was a white paper from the Ministry, I think, of Economics and Environment, both of which are controlled by the Green Party. And they were basically explaining why it was impossible to keep the 3 nuclear reactors open. Forget about reopening the ones that were closed, right? And if I remember, the arguments they said were, you don't have enough fuel, you don't have the people for maintenance, you need to do some security retrofitting, some security also analysis, that all of these things are going to take a long time. And there's probably a couple more of these issues. And so I wanted to hear from your perspective, first, what has happened over the last few weeks in the flip-flopping, and then what are the concerns that we heard from the government, and what's your opinion on them?
Well, I think we should go back just a little bit further than last few weeks. We should go back to the last few decades. Germany was defeated in World War II and was defanged in a way that ensured it would never get nuclear weapons. So when the world got nuclear weapons, when the traditional rivals and powers around Germany got nuclear weapons, the fact that Germany didn't put Germany in an extremely weird situation, culturally and economically and militarily in the world. It was permanently barred from having weapons at the scale of its economic power and economic might, which made a weird split start to occur, I think, in German thinking. Not to mention, there was a weird split in German geography, East Germany, West Germany. So Germany was not a playground's too flippant, but let's call it was a Cold War battleground between East and West. And for German people, well, you were growing up with the anxiety of potentially being a flashpoint for nuclear war without actually having any ability to do anything. You couldn't do anything about it. That anxiety about nuclear weapons made an easily exploitable anxiety about nuclear energy. Now, on my trip to Germany, I've heard some crazy things from reporters and from experts on tracking who specifically were the key folks recruited by Eastern intelligence, by Russian intelligence, to help turn the public in Germany against nuclear energy. I think regardless of how effective that was or whether it happened, it would have been possible to do this with just, I don't know, I don't want to call it the purest of intentions, but it would have been possible to turn Germans against nuclear energy anyway, by playing on the anxieties around nuclear war.
It's important here to notice that, to note for people who might not know this, because I've talked about nuclear with a lot of people, and this is a common fear, is the connection between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. And the quick of it is there is no way for you to take a nuclear reactor and turn it into a nuclear weapon. For you to do that, you actually need to enrich uranium extremely intensely. It takes a very long time. It takes a lot of technology, and then that's a piece of what you need for the weapons. And so you cannot develop a nuclear program in a way that is going to give you nuclear weapons. Also, because the amount of fuel that you need for the reactor is only a few grams. It is very controlled at an international level, and you cannot easily put this into nuclear warheads. And all of this complexity is some of the reason why there was a long delay between what, for example, Iran was doing for their nuclear program for energy and the timeline to get weapons. So that's these very loose connection between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons.
But Tomas,
is that accurate? Yeah, tell me.
I got to jump in. And if you're worried about people thinking you're going to be biased towards nuclear energy, let me say this. You'll almost never hear this from nuclear energy folks. There's a link between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, and that it's the most powerful tools in both defense and energy, wielded by the most organized and competent governments. In fact, here's the weird thing. Almost every country that got nuclear energy in the past did it at the same time they had a covert or overt nuclear weapons program. So I'm talking Spain. Spain got nuclear energy while trying to get nuclear weapons. Sweden, Switzerland.
Neither Sweden nor Spain have nuclear weapons, right?
No, and both of them attempted to go all the way out and get rid of all their nuclear plants. So the same feeling of security or change of political sentiment that causes countries like Sweden or Spain to get rid of their secret, their illegal perhaps, nuclear weapons program is connected to the sentiment that caused both Sweden and Spain to try to do nuclear phase outs, helping instigate the European energy crisis.
This is very relevant. So before getting to this, because you're highlighting these special cases that are important, but before, like the two cases, right? That is, what you say is true for the US, for UK, for France, 3 countries that develop both nuclear weapons and nuclear energy pretty heavily. You then have the exact opposite, which is probably Japan, which has like 50.
No, wait. Japan is ready should it need to defend itself. Let me just leave it there.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a secret program of nuclear weapons in Japan?
I mean, it's not very secret, and it may not. Let me put it this way. Japan is prepared to defend itself if America fails it.
Okay.
And whether that is an instant thing or a multi-month thing, and look, I'm going to have lots of people say, oh, Mark, how could you dare bring this stuff up? We've made so much progress in the public sphere talking about nuclear energy while disentangling it. Yes, I understand that, but I am going to be extremely disciplined about the truth. And the truth is that part of the reason the Japanese public is returning to liking nuclear energy and voting for politicians.
I know.
So hold on. Nuclear energy is the strongest energy you have. It is the most secure energy you have. It is the most independent energy you have. All of those things are the same fears or anxieties you're answering when you defend your country. So
super relevant. And at this point, we might go back to your background, because then like people are going to say, okay, like how do you know this, Mark? So tell us a bit of your background of the last few years, who you've been working with, and who's been funding your work.
Sure. So Michael Schellenberger established Environmental Progress. Environmental Progress was...
And not everybody knows, like he's famous, but not everybody knows him. So like, what's the 30-second on him?
Sure. Michael was a young, hard left, I'd say socialist, libertarian, not sure how he would categorize himself, but when he was a very young man, he from a family with Mennonite background, so one of the religious sects in America that's like sort of against technology and for peace and pretty hardcore Christians. He grew up in that sort of environment, and then he insisted as a high schooler being let to go by himself and live in a poor village in northeastern Brazil, extreme northeastern Brazil, just because that's how much he cared about the plight of the poor, plight of the environment. He was an environmental campaigner, but he took on labor and human rights issues through the 90s. So, for example, there was this big uncovering that supply chains exist. And if Nike or Adidas are using child labor through subcontractors in, say, Pakistan, the public needed to know, and they needed to put pressure on corporations to get better behavior and better working standards. That was one of the big campaigns that he helped expand into a global awareness, right? So he eventually started fighting for clean energy. He saw clean energy as something that had to be built. So you had to build a bunch of wind turbines or build a bunch of solar panels. That put him sort of against the traditional environmental movement, which is all about not building. The traditional environmentalism is finding everything in the world that you can see getting built and make it not be built. And that way it will protect the environment or kill people off and make fewer of them or something like that. That was traditional environmentalism. He found himself in opposition to that and established a movement that got called eco-modernism, him and a few other thinkers, some of his mentors. Then he moved on to saying nuclear energy actually seems really good. I'm now convinced that nuclear energy is the best. and he campaigned on that as the center of his environmental and humanistic outlook, I suppose. So he has been a part of and founded a succession of environmental nonprofits, the most recent of which was Environmental Progress. And Michael was absolutely fanatical about keeping any influences away that could ever convince him to try to say one thing or not say another thing. So he refused any industry money, regardless of whether the industry was on his side or not. He just wouldn't do it. And he was very weary of big granting organizations that impinged on his freedom of speech or the ability to take our research anywhere he wanted to go. The problem is, before the age of Substack, before he published big books, that it's very difficult to survive being utterly independent. Almost everybody, from the business world to the NGO world, wants something for their donation. They want something for their money. And that was very difficult for him. So the fact that Environmental Progress had taken a leadership role in the pro-nuclear movement around the world was a pretty big burden. We'd been trying to get activists who were just online folks, volunteers, maybe campaigners in green parties trying to reform green parties. We gathered up as many of those folks as we could find and together decided on you might say, a platform of being pro-human, pro-environment, and pro-nuclear. And then we worked to see those groups put on demonstrations and get out in the public and train themselves to talk to the public, which is something that a lot of people coming together on the internet are not necessarily going to be good at, especially anyone with an engineering background. You're not necessarily trained in public speaking, right?
From COVID.
Exactly.
And Michael was recently famous also because I think he was a candidate for governor in California, if I'm not wrong.
Indeed.
But you still work kind of you're in touch with him, but you kind of separated, and so now you're doing your own thing. So tell us about this.
Right. So I am a consultant to clean energy companies and to a lot of NGOs. And then I spend a lot of time one-on-one with people who have neither an NGO or a company. They're just nervous about nuclear disasters, say from Ukraine, or they want to know what they can do to change their country or their home region to get more nuclear plants. The way I describe my work is this. I try to stop nuclear closures, continuing from what I did at Environmental Progress, and I try to get more nuclear built. Not for any one company in particular, though I do have a few clients in the nuclear energy space at this point. And in order to do that, it's an immense amount of time spent with a wide variety of people around the world. At the moment, I'm here in Chicago for just 48 hours. After a month on the road, I'm headed out to the Philippines. Why the Philippines? Because one of the folks involved in the pro-nuclear movement got elected to office and is now interested in making sure that he hears the most accurate and up-to-date information about what's coming next in energy. And at this point, he has tons of industrialists and media figures and politicians interested in hearing from outsiders about what we see coming in nuclear energy and how to best position the Philippines to take advantage. So the Philippines, one of being one of the most populous countries in the world, has had a nuclear reactor built since the 80s and never turned on.
Wow. Oh, wow. It's done? It's finished?
It was finished very rapidly. There would probably have been a number, teething and a lot of effort put in to finally turn it on. And obviously training of staff and many things would have needed to be done. But the reactor was physically finished. And then with a change of government,
I didn't know this.
The change of government, an anti-nuclear politician came forward. And although, for being anti-nuclear, this new president started a trend of spending what's now about $1 million or $2 million a year, keeping the reactor from rotting, keeping it from rusting, keeping it patrolled, keeping the grounds cleared. Because, a tropical country could be covered in jungle by this point. So every leader of the Philippines since the 80s has kept this thing preserved, but not completed. And now the new president of the Philippines, well, it's his dad that built the reactor.
Got it.
His dad built the reactor. So
super interesting. So now that we know your background, so back to your claims. Okay, so Japan, and I understand the link that you're claiming on between nuclear weapons and energy. There's obviously countries that are in the exact opposite, such as Pakistan and Israel, where in both cases either no
North Korea and Israel.
They don't have nuclear reactors?
Energy. No. North Korea was working to import South Korea's first exported reactors. So South Korea bought American reactors with the explicit goal of being one of the finest nuclear exporters in the world. Their first big project was building in North Korea. That project was called off when it became clear that the North Koreans had a side project proliferating.
They went for the nuclear weapons anyway. Okay, so and then interestingly, then you're calling Spain and Sweden interesting cases, because in both cases, those are relatively independent or used to be independent countries militarily. Sweden neutral, Spain was neutral during World War II. It was neutral up to 1975 when Franco died. And the nuclear energy phase comes from that dictatorship. And in both cases, if I understand correctly, they cool down after Chernobyl, right?
Yep. So that's something in Spain. The stakes could not have been higher. Nuclear energy was a symbol of things much larger. So Spain is one of the most violent countries in the history of nuclear energy in terms of terrorist attacks and assassinations on nuclear executives and nuclear officials. People outside of Spain don't really realize that. It wasn't only that the terrorists were against nuclear energy, but nuclear energy was also seen by both sides as control from Madrid. It was centrally planned, powerful, coming from, and if you turned it on, it would make just all these companies and people just dependent on it because it'd be the cheapest and most secure energy source. So is that good or bad? It depends on your point of view.
Don't know some of the details that are relevant here, which is, I think, if I'm correct, or my memory is right, Spain had 9 nuclear reactors. I think they have 8 that are open left, but they also had at least one they were building in the Basque country. And that's the one that never got finished because...
You had several that didn't get finished. Some almost completely done and never got finished.
All or spread across Spain?
One was in Catalan, Catalonia.
Okay. Yep. I didn't know this.
So you can see how, if your point of view is more infrastructure, especially nuclear energy infrastructure from the capital, means a permanent hold. Well, this is one of the weird things that ties nuclear energy, at least in terms of historical arc, in terms of historical memory and narrative, to nuclear weapons. Upon the arrival of nuclear energy in the world.
Okay, so in Japan makes a lot of sense, and I can see the connection here with Germany, where you're basically saying, hey, if you want to remain this peaceful country that doesn't go into the direction of weapons, maybe we shouldn't do that on the energy side either. But regardless, Germany did go into the direction of the nuclear reactors. I think they built up to like 35 or something.
30, they had like 30, 33, 35% nuclear energy at their peak. So they were one of the biggest nuclear countries in the world. And the last era, like the last nuclear reactors that Germany built with Siemens and a collection of companies, were some of the finest nuclear plants ever constructed. And if they're allowed to survive through this winter, if they're allowed to survive after it, I think those things will last 100 years or longer. And one of the things that's so astonishing, German nuclear reactors, the giant German nuclear reactors that we have remaining, they only take about 250 workers to power 1.5 million people.
That's crazy. And so, and by the way, like side note on this one, the number of people per megawatt is very, very low. The fuel is actually also very, very cheap. And so the operation just of nuclear is just dirt cheap. It's dirt cheap. What it was expensive to...
In Germany, it's about 18 euros a megawatt hour.
Yeah, and just to give an order of magnitude for people who don't know, so 18 euros per megawatt hour, what's the average and what's the gas cost right now? You know?
So that would be, you would want to be comparing that against wholesale electricity costs. So wholesale electricity costs for the last decade, before this recent crisis, have been about 30 euros a megawatt hour, 40 euros. So it's cheaper than that.
40% cheaper than the average megawatt hour.
But that's not the price, that's not the going forward price. If you want to buy a long-term contract for electricity, you're going to be paying hundreds of euros per megawatt hour for wholesale prices, not like the price you end up paying as a consumer or whatever, just for wholesale electricity. Now, wholesale electricity is typically anywhere from 20% to 40% of the cost of delivered electricity to the public.
Yeah.
In other words, if Germany's wholesale cost was 30%, or it was 30 euros a megawatt hour. The cost to customers was much higher because of Germany's taxes and, well, spent hundreds of billions on building out alternatives to nuclear and coal. It's just they kept the coal, they didn't keep the nuclear, they tried to switch to gas. The gas got interrupted by Russia, and then the renewables, they go on and they go off and they go on and they go off. You still have to have the entire backup energy system, no matter how many renewables you build.
And you're back to coal. And so okay, so that's good background. And then 2012, Fukushima happens. Japan stops all their reactors. Germany says, Merkel says, okay, we're going to do this too. They immediately shut down a few, and then over the years they kept shutting them down. By December of 2020, there were 6 left. By December 2021, there's 3 left, right? And then now they're thinking, okay, by December of 2022, there's going to be 0 left. And so that's
December 31st at 11:59 p.m. So just to tell you how arbitrary and destructive this plan is. The schedule is the schedule, right? Yeah. It's just that the schedule happens to land during a time where Germany is under greater physical threat since World War II, which brings me back, Tomas, to why it's interesting that now that Germany's under immense threat, lives are at stake, the entire economy is at stake. People are going to freeze to death potentially across Europe. Maybe not in Germany because Germany's so rich they can buy gas to make up for their own mistakes. But now that it's life or death, Germany is turning towards nuclear. That's the link I really wanted to draw between the mortal fear that would cause a country to get nuclear weapons and the fear for life and limb that would cause them to get over their fear of nuclear energy. So we're seeing that at the same time.
One side note that I think is relevant. I once was in a consulting project with funerary homes business, and that got me into patterns of mortality. And it turns out that the vast majority of people die either in the summer or in winter, and the correlation is extremely strong with extreme weather. And so when we say a cold winter without energy can kill a lot of people, it is not a metaphor. Like literally, a lack of energy will kill a lot of people. And when you say a lot of people, like in a country like Germany, it could be in the hundreds of thousands of people, right? So I think my guess is the average mortality in a country like Germany is probably something like 1%, right? So 90 million people, that means that 900,000 people die a year. Like you can easily have a 10% increase in mortality with a very cold winter or a very hot summer, and so that gets into the orders of magnitude of hundreds of thousands of people. And
Tomas, I try not to use too many details about that in a lot of my conversations. One, because it's a rabbit hole. The other is it just makes you sound too extreme to say no. Actually, a jump in energy costs to here, or say seniors trying to do their part and self-ration energy. Is known to be a major cause of death in countries like the UK, just where I've seen the research. And Germany is a country that is in some ways uniquely unprepared in terms of this energy sector, but uniquely prepared in terms of its structures. German windows and doors are phenomenal. But German consumption of energy supplies to replace its nuclear plants are going to cause deaths in countries with worse windows and worse doors.
Yes.
Right? So this is something that Germans have been denying all year since the war started. They've been denying that grids exist that transfer electricity between Germany and other countries. They deny that gas used in Germany is gas not available elsewhere in the world. They deny that coal used in Germany is coal not available in the rest of the world. And it's so ironic. You have to say it's ironic, Tomas, because all of their plans for decarbonizing included the mega grid and gas between countries and sharing electricity and sharing energy supplies, right? And they pretend that none of that sharing exists the second they want to make up lies and excuses for not extending their nuclear plants.
Okay, so let's get into this one. Just summarizing what I'm hearing you say, you're saying now everybody, the majority of people in Germany was against nuclear over the last decade or so, and so that's one of the probably that's the main reason why there was a nuclear shutdown. And then this war happens. and one of the things that not everybody knows is the popular opinion has radically changed. If I'm correct,
skyrocketed. I don't think very few European countries have ever seen the pro-nuclear numbers we're seeing in polling coming out of Germany.
That's right. And so the poll that I know is like 70% of Germans are pro-nuclear energy now, or like what are the numbers?
Well, let's talk about it in terms of the polls that I've seen, which ask about whether the plant should be life extended, right? I've also seen some polls that are more generic and a little bit less about instant action and more like, in the long term, should Germany do X? Well, the polls that are most relevant to the decision makers now are the polls that say something like 85% of Germans say that the nuclear plant should be life extended for some period above zero. So 15% of Germans in the polling that I've seen from a week or two ago, it may be even smaller now, don't want the plants extended even 1 minute past midnight.
Hey, how many don't want? 5% you said don't want?
15% on the polling.
So 85% want extension, only 15%. 1.5 don't want. Okay.
And something like, I think it was 55%, 53%, somewhere around there, want to see nuclear on till 2027 or permanently. So they want life extensions through, 5 years from now.
Okay, and so now you have the public that has turned around. Usually, politicians follow the public in democracies, at least, and so. But here, if I am aware of the latest, the government has still not said that they're going to be extending the reactors, right? So what's the latest there?
The key ministries are controlled by a political party that got its start from getting all nuclear technologies out of Germany. Like, that was the point of the Green Party. They were not green because of the environment. They were not green because that's the color of trees. They were not green because they cared about climate change. That was nothing to them. They were Green Party because that was the color associated with the movement to denuclearize West Germany, not East Germany, right? Just West Germany, yeah. So to get nuclear weapons out of West Germany, to get nuclear energy out of West Germany, and when the weapons were gone, I mean, look, the weapons, they weren't going to do anything about that. What they were going to succeed on is the nuclear energy, and succeed they did. Anyway, Eastern German nuclear plants got sacked almost immediately upon reunification. There was a massive Soviet-built, Soviet-designed, hosted by Germany nuclear plant at the same town where Nord Stream's now come aboard, which is one of those big ironies, right?
Yeah, it is, right? Because of connection with Russia. I know you were ironic, but so then that makes sense. That's their history, and obviously, when that's your identity, it changes things. But one thing is your identity, and the other one is Jesus. All your base has switched sides now, and is changing opinion. And so like. You have these ministries that are controlling. I think, if I'm wrong, if I'm right, it's the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Environment, right? And so both of these are
the same ministry.
Oh, it's the same ministry. Okay, got it.
And it's also the Ministry of Energy. See, so you have one guy trained in literature who wrote children's books, and he's in charge of economy, environment, and energy altogether.
Okay. I mean, I'm a fan of people who can do multidisciplinary stuff, but I want.
That's a little extreme. It'd be one thing if he were using his literature skills to understand the scope of the challenge and how to work in energy and what to do and how to read polls and stuff. But he's using his literary skills to take advisors' statements about how to lie to people about the nuclear plants, and he's dressing them up with very serious statements like, well, we just couldn't get the fuel, and also the plants can't get new employees or their checks done in time. And then the nuclear companies are like, we can actually.
I hear the claim, but you're jumping to the claim without the evidence yet. And so I think that's the key piece, right? Because otherwise, like, people will say, oh, you're biased, blah, blah. And so then going back to this one, that ministry is still stating that we're closing the nuclear reactors by the end of the year, correct?
They're struggling with trying to achieve that against what's clearly an immense amount of opposition from industry, public, coalition partners. The latest news, so I was just in Germany hours ago, practically. The latest news when I was there is that some professors that I've never worked with, that are not connected to me or my movement, some professors independently decided to make a petition, an official petition with official languages, official submissions to the government. They need 50,000 signatures. They're well on their way. They're going to get there pretty easily to get a debate in Parliament in the Bundestag about keeping on the 3 nuclear plants that are still on. We wish they would have phrased it to be the 3 that can still be returned to service quite rapidly, but whatever, we'll take it. So that happened.
So really quickly on this one, just in case, so we don't forget, because how does it work? If they get 50,000 signatures, the parliament has to debate this.
It has to have a debate. Yes.
And it's for 50,000 German signatures.
Yes. Yeah. But anybody listening out there, just find some Germans, send them the link.
So definitely send me the link after this, and we'll try to see what we can do. So 50,000 signatures, and then if we get that, then what happens exactly?
In my opinion, it gives a lot of room for the coalition partners to rebel against the Green Party and the SPD if they're still... So the current coalition in government is the Liberals, the Social Democrats, and the Greens. So the stoplight coalition, the reds, yellows, and greens, right? So with the polls moving radically in favor of nuclear, the Liberals are finding their energy, and the other parties that are out of government, like CDU, CSU, Christian Democrats, they're finding their second wind, I suppose, and they are wanting to force the issue of the nuclear staying on, but they don't control the relevant ministries, and unless there's an election called, this has to be done through other means. So the debate is a key thing that would focus national attention and force coalition fractures. Now, what we're also seeing is that the Liberals, the FDP, are wanting to force open the issue now against the coalition, potentially risking the fall of the government in its current form on this nuclear energy issue.
So then, if they're willing to do this, why have they been public about it so far, or what's going on?
As of this past week, yes.
Oh, so what
so everything's accelerating. As we are recording this, I'm not paying attention to the news. I bet we'll see a piece of news from Berlin just from us talking.
Got it. And it's interesting you're saying this. I was in Paris last week. And I met with the person who works in the nuclear sector here in Europe, and he was talking with. He was in Paris because he was talking with people in the nuclear energy sector in Paris and Berlin. And they were talking about fuel. They were talking about fuel as in, hey, how do we do, like if we were to reopen these reactors, what do we do with the fuel? And so to get into the detail of this, the claim in April from the German Ministry of Economy and Environment and Energy was one of the many reasons why we cannot keep the nuclear reactors open is because we don't have enough new fuel. Now, it turns out that there's always half-truths in this thing. And so what this expert told me is they don't have enough fuel in the reactors. Where they have enough fuel is in the pools. So people might not know this.
Sort of. This I got to correct you just a little bit.
Okay,
what the expert may have been referring to is that in an unusual case, one of the recently shut reactors had been having issues with corrosion on the fuel. Why? Because it was moving up and down rapidly in its power in not an experimental fashion, but experimental for Germany, shall we say. Why was it moving its power rapidly up and down? Because it was in the north with all the wind turbines. But if the wind turbines aren't there when you need them, why would you threaten the operation of the nuclear plant, which is there when you... Well, that was the law. The law is that if you're a wind turbine, you get to dump your power on, no matter if it damages the conditions of the power plants that are going to bail you out once the wind stops. It's a very destructive policy that's now coming to bear very bitter fruit across Europe. But at the time, this power plant was going like this. To solve the corrosion issues and to keep operating all the way up until December 31st of last year, of 2021, it needed a fresh new shipment of fuel. That fresh shipment of fuel is such that if that plant were turned back on, you have the fuel that you need to run at full power for at least a year without ordering any new fuel. The other plants, the other plants have run their fuel that's in the spent fuel pools as far as it's going to go. I think the better way to put it is the plants that are on now can be run on so-called stretch out operation, which means that you operate beyond optimal, not in terms of safety, but in terms of the performance, the total output of the reactor, and you decline, and the fuel sort of runs down like this. The reason why that's possible is because normally reactors don't stop in the middle of peak energy season because there's a law saying that we're doing a forever phase out, right? So the reactors had enough fuel to go to full power all the way to that day, whereas normally you put in fuel in a reactor such that right after it's time to start refueling, you start heading downwards. So there is reactivity in the fuel. There is enough to keep going for some number of months, depending on which reactor we're talking about. Of the 3 that are currently on, they could go for, say, 3 or 4 months, or even longer, 6, 7, 8 months, depending on which ones I've heard from which company.
Thank you for that, and so that makes sense. The additional thing that I think this guy was telling me is that they have up to a year and a half of fuel if you count for the stuff that's in the pool, and
that's a little bit. So the tricky thing there is that doesn't mean you can, even if you could get the energy out of that fuel, you can't necessarily start up the reactor. It has to be already going. So if you shut down the reactor when you're at a declining level of reactivity, you would have to pull out too many control rods and do too much to get the reactor to turn on. If it were an absolute emergency and millions were dying or whatever, I'm sure we'd figure out a way. But it's not what you would want to do. Me, as somebody who loves nuclear, I wouldn't be comfortable with altering normal procedures enough to do that. If you shut down a nuclear reactor during stretch out, you're not going to turn the reactor back on without refueling.
But could you keep it going and then reuse some of the wasted fuel in the pools to keep it running for longer?
You wouldn't, because then you need to turn off the reactor and put it in, and at that point you need fresh fuel.
Okay. So
having said that, even a pessimistic judgment on how long it would take to get new fuel was about a year. At the point that the reactors were being rediscussed in April, March, April, May, for them to say we don't have fuel, that would have been enough time to order new fuel and have it there in time for the end of stretch out operations. Instead, they wasted the entire summer, and now most of the autumn they're going to waste dithering about this in order to say, oh, see, we told you there isn't fuel, right?
So one thing about this, so you're right, but there's actually, again, a nuance here, which is you said most pessimistic 1 year, and most pessimistic 1 year, there's different timelines there, and there's the minimum amount of time to just like build the rods the way that they're adapted to the reactors in Germany. That's one piece, and then transport them and whatnot. But then, and that's the thing that is very hard to compress. But there's another piece, I assume, in that here, which is a lot of the paperwork, right, and laws and process and whatnot. And so
I would worry about that for any other country, not Germany. Germany can get a mountain of paperwork done lightning fast. They are not like other people. They're not like my people in America. They're not like your people. If they want.
And the thing there, because that's the number one thing that we hear all the time from Germans, right? The number one thing is, the law says I cannot do this and that, right? And so it's like specifically in the fuel, they need to have a proper process, a competitive process for the fuel and whatnot. And so there, and then there's constitutional reasons why, like, there's things that you can do or cannot do. And so there, my claim there is, if there's a will, you can do it, right?
That's where I think part of the increasing public sentiment comes from, because when Minister Habeck uses paperwork, or we just don't know how to find the pieces of paper, just like Germans dismissed that when Putin said that about finding the right turbine for Nord Stream. Of course, they're going to dismiss it when Scholz and Habeck says, oh, we don't know. Where's the pin? We can't find a big pin to sign the paper. So who could even save German lives? No Germans believe that. Germans know that this is an issue about whether nuclear could continue, not about like the details of the paperwork. Now, where there's the confusion is which reactors are still in good enough shape to turn back on. There's also some confusion about the stretch out operations. There's a little bit of confusion about where to get the fuel. But in terms of paperwork, permissions, laws, that was done in so fast to get emergency fuel supplies into Germany.
That's a fair opinion to have. I share that opinion, but obviously a person that is against nuclear will listen to these arguments from the Ministry of Energy and Environment. So are you acquainted with the details of exactly what is it that they say is not doable from a legal standpoint?
Well, the problem is those details keep changing, because the point isn't to describe a truth and then do something about it. If you describe something that's a barrier to operation and the industry or lawmakers go and do something about it, and your point is to stop operation, that's not good. The point is to make a changing set of excuses. You know, the way I'd put it is this. There's this Brothers Grimm fairy tale about Cinderella, and in the popular Disney retelling of it, Cinderella gets some emergency intervention that are going to help. It's going to help her get to the ball, right? But before that happens, it doesn't look like she's going to go to the ball, because after she asks to go, she's given intentionally disruptive tasks to do all the way up until it's too late, right? She's given other dresses to work on, house to clean, all sorts of things, while being told that she could stay on as long. Yeah.
Very, very graphic metaphor. So I hear your position. I am sure the people who are against nuclear disagree with you on that one. But that's one. Okay, let's put it on the side. So what are then for you the biggest arguments against keeping the nuclear reactors open, and what's your opinion about those?
Sure. So I think I'm going to agree with some of the operators of the nuclear reactors that being told you can stay on for just a few months, but you're going to have to spend a ton of money and disrupt the lives of the workers. Yeah. It's difficult because because the pain is going to be spread all over Germany and Europe from the reactors closing by allowing the plant to stay on for just a few months, while almost certainly being told that if you make some extreme amount of profit, it's going to be taken away, and being told that.
I agree with you. I think what I'm hearing is this is actually a bit more binary. It's not can we keep them open for a few months more or not. This is, do we shut them down right now, or do we keep them open for probably 5 or 6 years, right?
Exactly. And the laws that I think that liberals are looking at maybe addressing, or the Stuttgart Declaration, this petition I told you about with the professors led by somebody from Stuttgart University. Well, that's about a shorter run than even probably the utilities would like, but they'd be willing to negotiate, I suspect. You were probably looking for something like, is there a physical reason, a safety reason, an economic reason, a security of supply reason to not do the nuclear? I've worked very hard to steelman that, but I just can't find one, because again, the German reactors are the finest in the world. If you wanted to debate the English reactors, the UK's reactors that are turning off, there's one where I don't know if I would totally be on the side of the people wanting to keep those reactors on. They're the only reactors in the world with internal failures happening that we know of that are eventually going to shut them down in the next few years, and we don't know when. I don't know if I would argue all the way for those reactors just on nuclear safety, security, and not panicking the public. But the German reactors are the best there is. They require the fewest employees. They put out the best. I mean, and they're in an extreme emergency, not just for Germany, but all of Europe.
So that makes sense. You mentioned the Stillman argument, right? And in case people don't know, Stillman argument is basically taking your opponent's point of view and trying to make it as strong as you possibly can. And so one of the key things that you're saying about that Stillman argument is you wouldn't want to keep them open just for a few months. Or that would have to be fully financed by the government.
Here's another one.
Okay.
It's that the German plants don't displace gas electricity, so it's not worth changing your policy on them just because there's a gas crisis. What's so incredibly dishonest about this is, first of all, if it's not German gas it displaces, and it does some, then it's gas in neighboring countries. There's a reason the EU has just quietly removed coal from the list of sanctioned products coming from Russia. Javier Blas, the Bloomberg reporter, just revealed that on Twitter this morning, that the EU needs coal from Germany, but coal, now that's the thing that we say substitutes for nuclear. So Germany's saying that they could substitute gas for nuclear. That's why they built Nord Stream 2 and we're going to turn off the nuclear plant. Then they say, just kidding, gas doesn't substitute for nuclear. Nuclear only competes with coal. But now it's saying that coal is needed to substitute for gas, and they need Russian coal to help them do that. You see where this game is going. I'd like to steelman this better than I have. The gas argument is intensely dishonest. We opened this conversation on energy policy by mentioning that Germany's energy plan before the war was to connect with a big supergrid Everybody's got renewables and wind and solar that go up and down, and you connect to hydro in the north and Scandinavia, and you connect to solar down south in Spain, and you transfer energy across borders to substitute for fossil fuels. But if that's true, then transferring energy across borders to substitute for fossil fuels does exist. German nuclear reactors substitute for fossil fuels inside and outside of Germany. They know this. They've always known this.
And specifically here, you're talking about countries like Poland, Austria, and the like?
Keep going around the circle. France.
Not France. They have their own nuclear.
Denmark. You say they have their own nuclear.
Yes,
they had a decade of policy to defund and to get out of nuclear. That policy is coming to fruition in an awful availability of their nuclear fleet. They have not hired well for their nuclear plants. They have not supported them. And to get promoted at EDF in the past, according to the EDF folks that I've talked to, and people inside and outside both vouch for this, you needed to believe in a non-nuclear EDF future. I once met.
Just for the people who don't know this, EDF, c'est Électricité de France. It's the French biggest energy company. It's the one that controlled all the nuclear plants. I think there's like 50-something nuclear reactors in France, and it was mostly public, partially. By public, I mean controlled by the government. It had some of its stock floated in the stock market, and the government just a few weeks ago bought that out, and now it's a fully nationalized company. One of the main reasons is because like half of the reactors are decommissioned right now. They're not working because of corrosion issues, because of the management that you're talking about, and they want to turn that around very, very quickly for the winter because of the threat on Russia, right?
Yeah, so just to give a very particular flavor on this, one of the best nuclear plants they had was Fessenheim. They intentionally closed it in 2020, right? And it's one of their best ones. It would have been fine. It would not have had the corrosion issues. It was not part of the series of plants that are having the corrosion issues. Yeah, and it was shut down because they had too much energy and they needed to scale out nuclear too. And this is official government policy, make room for renewables on the grid. So they shut down their nuclear without the renewables actually being there or providing the same service, especially in the winter.
And so then back to that claim that nuclear energy wouldn't eliminate too much gas consumption from Russia. So two things. One of them you say, not actually true. It does eliminate a part of the German gas consumption. And just for clarity there, the dependence on Russian energy was relatively high at the beginning of the year. I think like 30% or something like that. Maybe in Germany was taken from Russia, and then they've been shrinking that through the year. And then
Russia's been shrinking that through the year. Yeah, so Germany can say, "Oh, we sanctioned them," but the gas was being turned off. If Russia had given the gas through a pipeline, Germany would have eagerly found a way to make the paperwork work. That wasn't going to be the problem.
That's right. A couple of caveats, though. They have been installing LNG terminals in the North Sea, right? And so
they got the paperwork done, didn't they?
Yeah. That's right. Well, I don't know if legally, and that's one of the questions I had, but maybe we'll figure out in another way. Like maybe in the paperwork, the nuclear is different from the gas. I don't know. But in any case, like they have these temporary terminals of natural liquefied gas, liquefied natural gas in the North Sea. They are building very, very fast new terminals to get gas through the sea into the country. And that's to replace gas, not just for electricity, that's a piece of it, but mostly for heat. Because it's true that most of the consumption in Germany of Russian gas is for heat. And so I think that point is valid.
But marginal high prices decrease when there's marginal decrease in consumption. For example, because you don't turn off your largest power plants. The 6 million people's worth of electricity is due to be shut off on December 31st.
And so like that's a point that people like might not have followed. The argument there is when the cost of the energy is the cost at the energy production at peak, right? And so if you need to add a lot of gas that's very expensive, your overall cost of energy is going to be shooting up dramatically. But if you have much more base nuclear electricity, in fact, your peak is going to be substantially lower, and
especially
will dramatically down.
Especially the effect on prices when you suddenly add in 4 gigawatts of nuclear that had been blocked from selling into the market because they were supposed to turn off.
That's right.
So you would have a substantial effect on price with a surprise magical 4 gigawatts that's on straight through the year, right?
So the point there, I think the overarching point is it's true that ideally gas would be replaced more for heat. That is something that's going to take substantially more time, and that's one of the reasons why there's LNG terminals in the North Sea. It's one of the reasons why Germans want a gas pipeline from Spain to France to get Algerian gas. But the fact that electrical energy from Russian gas is the smallest piece of Russian energy doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. Like it would still reduce the dependency on Russian gas, and it would still dramatically reduce the cost of electricity in Russia.
And coal and nuclear are interchangeable, and coal and gas are interchangeable. And here's another thing. Heating from gas is interchangeable with heating from electricity, which is why Germany, like almost every other country with a decarbonization plan to electrify heating. So like to pretend that electric hot water heaters or electric space heaters, that because you can't run gas, you just have one little heater in your one room in your home, or electric blankets or electric tea kettles. Almost all the interventions that governments are going to say to do if you don't have enough gas to heat your home are going to be from electricity, which could be supplied, especially in the night and especially in the coldest, longest, darkest stretches of winter, calmest stretches of winter by the nuclear fleet.
Going back to the key arguments that you're hearing from anti-nuclear in Germany, one of them is you cannot just keep them open for a few months. It needs to be a few years, and the answer is yes. So what? The second one is electricity is the smallest piece of Russian gas use, and the two answer there is actually it is a smaller piece, but it's not. It's still substantial, and electricity is actually interchangeable with heat.
And that electricity is interchangeable across borders.
That's right. Yeah, and borders. That's right. And so that's for the second argument. Some of the other arguments that I heard were like, we don't have the spare parts, we don't have the fuel. We talked about the fuel, but not much. We don't have the security, and we don't have the people. So what do we know about these things?
Okay, let's start with the people first, and then we can go backwards to the others. Yeah. This is something where if I weren't in touch with folks who worked at German nuclear plants, then I would be blind. The folks at German nuclear plants, the workers at nuclear plants have known this end was coming. They've watched all the other nuclear plants shut down, obviously, and they are sick that this is happening to the finest of the cream of the crop of the globe's nuclear reactors, which are the Germans' so-called convoy system, KONVOI. It was a system for standardizing nuclear reactors and providing better cost and longer life and lower staffing on completed plants. So these three convoy reactors are the pride and joy of German engineering, and the workers have stated to their employer and to themselves that they are committed to continue to operating this as long as they're allowed to. Here's another thing. Under German law, you can't just decommission immediately. You can't just fire everybody. When Indian Point was shut down, just north of New York City, just before a massive energy crisis, I mean, we're hearing this all over, Tomas, absolute worthless political leadership driving us into the energy crisis as hard as possible. Well, in Indian Point nuclear plant in the United States, in New York, the day they shut down, they transferred or laid off the majority of the workforce. That's what I was told by the workers there, that almost everybody was going to go home and a few were going to stay on. A few were moving to the same companies operating plants elsewhere in the United States. And then most were just being retired or sent on.
And
Germany doesn't have that. Germany has to retain those workers anyway for, I don't know, up to a year. 2 of the 3 reactors that turned off on December 31st, 2021, have not even gotten their permission to start dismantling. I asked why. As of a month or 2 ago, the answer from the utilities was, oh, we just haven't applied for it yet.
Hold on. So out of the three, so there's six, right? There's three that are still open, three that closed in December of last year. You're saying two of them haven't started decommissioning and they still have the employees there? Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting.
And the reason why the others started decommissioning is because it was part of a pair of units at one large plant that already had an active decommissioning program ongoing.
I see. Got it. Okay. So that's
I've been told that it would be restorable too. Might be longer, maybe a lead time of a year or 2.5 years.
Got it. Which and I think that's relevant because the idea there is the purpose of what we're, like the number one reason why we're doing this is because of the war with Russia, and so if you cannot have it during the heat of the war, maybe you don't want them. But still, like I think you're
that's foolish because if the war ends, Germany's plan is to go dependent on natural gas flows again.
This is more arguable because you could say, look, our install base is of renewables is growing very, very fast. I'm building now my energy terminals, and so I'm going to be more independent by that time. And so, but I think that's debatable. But we don't even need to get that debate, right? So like even just staying for a moment, just on the three ones that are still open, right? So you're saying these people are not going anywhere. So that's on the people side. What about the other ones, like the maintenance, the security, and the spare parts?
So by security, do you mean like literally guards at the gates?
No, by security, the claim in April of the government was because these reactors were closing in 2022, we didn't go through the safety analysis that all the others that they should have gone through, and the retrofits for safety to keep them going for some time.
That part's not valid either. German nuclear plants would not be allowed to operate day to day if they didn't meet the highest standards of one of the most traditionally nuclear phobic.
That's what they claim. What they claim is the opposite. They say it was okay because it was temporary.
This is just false. That's a misunderstanding of the inspection schedule and what is required to maintain operation at a German nuclear plant day to day in good standing with the government.
Where I need to get the other opinion because obviously that sounds weird to me too. But I'm curious what
I got to tell you, what we've learned about these ministers and the people making these arguments, they have never looked at these issues ever before until right now in order to make an argument that the plants shouldn't stay on. It means they make mistakes. It means they slip up all the time. They slip up on the dependency of gas, coal, and nuclear to keep the grid up. They slip up on the dependency of different countries transacting electricity with each other. They slip up on the difference between long-term and short-term energy crises. This is going to be a long-term one. Because they're making these up as they go, they are not prepared. They are not psychologically or intellectually prepared to talk about energy.
So strong claim, potentially possible. You mentioned the Stillman before. Who would be the strongest, most reasonable voices in Germany in favor of shutting down the nuclear plants? Do you know this?
I think Habeck is the best. Partly because he's so insulated from, I don't know. What people tell me, this is more speculation, exactly what you don't want on your show, but I'll just say it because this is the rumors fresh from Berlin, where I've just come. Habeck has surrounded himself with advisors who know that they are there to provide excuses to drag your feet on nuclear until it's too late. That is the reason those advisors are on Habeck. So he is also an extremely compelling speaker and writer, if you like his style. As some Germans do, and
just very quick for clarification: is this the Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck?
Yes, Robert Habeck, but also he's the Minister for Economy, Energy, Environment, which is a sort of triple ministry. And he's one of the stars of the Green Party, until recent weeks, one of the fastest rising parties in Germany in terms of public approval, and has scored incredible victories running up to this energy crisis.
Okay. So what is
in regional and national elections?
So he's the biggest defender of this. The paper that I read in April, which was their official statements, that was from April. Is there any place where they have stated since then their strongest position on this?
Anytime anyone other than Robert Habeck speaks on nuclear, I just wait for whether Habeck is going to repeat it or his ministry is going to put something out. So I'm thinking this comes up. I'm trying to recall how frequently he steps out and talks about nuclear once every couple of weeks. Probably one of the more interesting moments was a few weeks ago where he was attending an event and speaking in public and handling questions on stage in public about nuclear. That led to a rush of headlines around the world repeating his words that he is against the startup of the nuclear plants. So the reason why I mentioned that is because the headline said, "Minister rules out startup of nuclear plants," when instead he said, "It's not up to me. We're going to do a stress test. The stress test, we already did it, and it said we didn't need to keep the reactors out of protest from France, who's so bad at operating nuclear that they said, we're going to be in a crisis if you don't keep your nuclear plants on." Habeck says we're going to, redo the stress test even harder, and maybe it'll say that we need them on. So these repeated, it's sort of kabuki theater. It's just all of this it's not taking seriously the way of leadership, except having built a party to get rid of nuclear and that being the highest and best goal. So Habeck's recent speech at that conference claimed that it wasn't up to him, that he was against it, but maybe the government would find out they should keep it, and that we had to wait for the process to play out. That was his recent claims. What's interesting this week from the head of the FDP is a minister, Lindner, saying essentially, "I swore to protect the German people. Turning off the plants would not be protecting the German people and would be against my oath." So This is the drama that's most recent. Official documents, they can be changed, right? The official documents are the tail indicator.
I think what I'm going for here is the strongest technical defense to closing the nuclear plants, because obviously your claim is a strong claim. Hey, this is completely false, and I'm sure they have some backup for it. And so I would like to go into the detail of exactly why they're saying that this is the case to see what it makes sense or not. And so obviously he's not going to go into the detail.
Well, then let me add a little bit of context. Traditionally, the German nuclear industry was totally beaten down. All they needed to do was step up and protest once or twice to get a few billion of extra euros to shut down their plants. But the German nuclear lobby was silent and pathetic. A bunch of beaten down little dogs, whipped dogs. That's what they were. I know. I visited them repeatedly, and I don't think they'd be offended by me saying that. I think they would freely admit that that's what they were. What happened in April when the document came out that said, "Oh, we just can't do nuclear," was astonishing. I never, even trying to save the German plants, I never would have predicted this. The KernD, the Atom Forum Germany, or whatever they're called now, they switched their names. They stood up and they made a big document based on the top experts in the country on nuclear. And they're in the employment of these utilities that control the atomic lobby. And they responded point by point and said that's not the case. Since then, I haven't seen technical documents from Germany claiming, because who would write it? Who would write it? All the technical experts are in the industry. It's just that the industry used to be the whipped dog of the government. It's not anymore. They have some independent spine, which is something to watch, because I would think that if they didn't feel they had the backing of, say, CDU and FDP actually in government, I don't think they would have the spine to do the right thing. I just don't
that's an
expect
interesting
that
claim. I think it's worth stating for.
I have no evidence. I'm just saying.
What your claim is the anti-nuclear lobby in Germany has so little rational backing that they are not producing technical documents anymore because they know they cannot support them. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I mean, who would, I've seen this issue in several countries where there's a core competency needed. There was these core technical people required to make statements for or against nuclear, and they're either captured by one side or the other. Just as another case, California recently turned around on nuclear energy, right? Before that occurred, you could not hire the best and most trusted energy experts. You could not hire them to do a study to show that Diablo was necessary. You couldn't do it. Why? Because they're like, oh, we got to keep our contracts with the state. And until the state switched its mind, and then everyone is ready to step up and do a study showing how important Diablo was. That's the way technical expertise works in a modern democracy.
I'll see if I can get anything better than this, but for now, I hear you claim. And so And then now back to the couple of things that we said. So the safety you're saying is bullshit. The other two things that we talked about were spare parts and fuel. So
yes. Okay, let's do spare parts and fuel. So the great fuel companies of the world, who are not Russian, have stepped up and said, we will stand by and be waiting with capacity to fulfill German fuel orders.
Which ones are those?
Well, so Westinghouse has facilities in Europe. They said they're ready and waiting. They've even claimed that they could do it in 120 or so days. And that was something they told in person to visitors who are part of our nuclear movement. Okay. They said straight up, we can do it.
Is claiming in 4 months, I can give you the fuel. So that's for the fuel. And then
the French have said, hey, we can do fuel for you. I mean, heck, they don't need much fuel for their own reactors, do they? Those barely operate. But so they've stepped up and said, we can fuel the German reactors. The CEO of the main fuel cycle company went on the news a few months ago and said, we stand waiting to deliver fuel to get Germany out of this crisis.
And what CEO is this?
It would have been Orano. So okay. That's so the main French fuel cycle company. So the French state nuclear program has sort of three big components. And they own each other, but they're all under sort of government management. I guess Orano is the most independent. I don't know if saying government management is fair there, but EDF operates the reactors. Framatome is nuclear reactors. I believe it's owned by EDF or under it. Again, it's all under the state. So Framatome designs and services nuclear reactors. And then Orano's fuel cycle. So they do things like the mining, the processing, the enriching, the fuel recycling, that sort of thing.
We have two companies that claim they can solve the fuel issue. And so what about the spare parts?
That's just not, that's the weirdest one. When I've pressed folks working at the nuclear plants, what about spare parts? They're just kind of like, I think that would go against Germans have those. I know that sounds weird, but there are no large parts needed. One of the most recent claims from, again, this week, you want a fresh podcast, here we go. So the claim is that there's a leak at the ISAR 2 nuclear plant. This is a claim about a valve in the secondary coolant loop. That means there's water that goes to the reactor and back through. That is the primary loop. It's the water that comes through the core. It's the inner heart of the heat transfer of the reactor. Then there's the secondary loop. This is water that goes and gets heated up by the first water. The secondary loop has a device called a pressurizer. The pressurizer just moves. It's the point where there's a steam and liquid water interface, and you just add more water to cool off that steam and depressurize. That raises that lowers the pressure in the pressurizer and therefore of the system, or it increases the pressure and pushes down on it. Okay. So that has a valve that's designed to leak before break, and it's designed to leak as it wears out. And you can continue to operate the reactor. It's just you would replace the valve before returning it to service. So the claim is that would be an example of parts that would need to be replaced, and therefore, well, look, they have extras of the small parts. They don't need the large parts. They have the people and the abilities to get the reactor to stay in service up to December 31st. They don't lose that January 1st. Parts, I've asked specifically to the experts at the plants, the parts aren't an issue. And so, I would love to see any specific claims for parts that people say can't be replaced.
So if I summarize what I'm hearing is there's a bunch of arguments from Germans, from the German Ministry of Energy, Economy, and Environment against keeping the nuclear open. Number one, there's a few small ones like spare parts, fuel, maintenance, and like safety and people. And then so on the spare parts, we're saying actually they don't need any big spare parts, and they have spares for the small ones. On the fuel, there's at least two companies that are saying they can provide it. On the people,
now they may not be able to provide the fuel until a week or two after the end of stretch out operations in April, May, June, or July, depending on which reactor. But the fuel can be had. These shortages of aspects of the fuel supply chain from Russia being cut off. Well, that's the funny thing. Clearly, the shortages of Russian coal aren't a problem, and the EU is fine getting coal from Russia because coal's expensive. It's like different rules being kept just for nuclear, only because that has been the ideological basis of EU energy policy. They will solve it if they want to, Tomas. Other countries will make it work.
Yeah. Obviously the other thing that we had mentioned before on the fuel is they do have enough fuel to last a few more months. So they could last for a few more months, and then they could get more fuel after that. On the people side, these people are going to keep working on these plants anyway, and then some of the and on the safety side, we're claiming that actually they're good. I think that's one that I need to look into, but that's the thing. And then those are the arguments that sound the weakest. On the strongest ones, there's nuclear is only the smaller piece of the Russian gas replacement, and the point of it is it's more than heat. That's true, but some of the heat is replaceable by electricity, and then two, you can use all of that electricity to replace gas in Russia outside of Germany, and number three, you can use the nuclear electricity to reduce the demand at peak, which is the most expensive spending in gas costs. And then the final argument is you need to
not just peak, but long-term going for electricity prices are going to be permanently cheaper with nuclear compared to without, because nuclear is the cheapest and most reliable component of the electricity supply in Germany, by far the cheapest now, right? Which means that if part of surviving winter is not just not losing your citizens, but also not losing your industries, you protect the German economy this winter and in the long term by returning the reactors to service. That's beyond just the argument for the momentary peaks of like the oil burning generators on and the gas burning generators on and all the coal plants turned on. And that peak comes when wind and solar aren't there. So they can't help that. The definition of peak now is practically the peak net demand after you subtract out the wind and solar, which means that's at the highest when you don't have wind and solar.
That's right. So that's for that one. And then the last one is economically, this is not viable. Just for a few months, you want to keep them open for 5 to 6 years if you want this to be viable. And so the answer to this is
which three to 4 years is likely the break-even point. Again, more speculation. I speculate that's what they've probably told the political parties that are on the side of keeping the plant. What is the smallest number of years that would make it worthwhile that the utility would say yes, we'll keep it?
And so the two arguments against it is one, like if this is a matter of state safety, you can have the state fund this, and then two, you worst case scenario, even if you're anti-nuclear, you keep this open for 5-6 years, and it's not the end of the world.
And when you say state funded, we're talking about plants that if they were allowed to profit from re-entering the market now, would be making hundreds of millions, if not billions of euros in profit per reactor going forward. Even tiny reactors in the EU that are going unhedged, meaning they hadn't pre-sold their electricity into this crisis, even tiny reactors like the one in the Netherlands can fund an entire new nuclear program with just the retained earnings in this electricity price crisis. So when you say who's going to fund the work?
But so then why do they, if that's true, why do these companies claim that it's not economically viable to keep them open just for 18 months or 2 years?
Because all the risk is on them. Because they're getting all the risk and they might have the profits taken too.
The risk of what?
The risk of, say, for whatever reason, not being able to turn on the reactors after spending 50 or 100 million in a panic across their fleet to get them back into service quickly. How about this?
They would not be able to reopen them.
You still have to do it. The same reason you can't look. Let's say they're getting into the reactors, doing lots of changes, and a few critical employees can't be found, and then one part deep in the reactor found. Until it happens, until it physically occurs, until the government signs off, yes, you're okay and can go, they would be needing to rapidly invest a bunch of money today, starting today,
I see.
Without an absolute guarantee that they get their money back.
What you're saying is not they would be losing money. They probably would be making a hefty profit, but there's a high risk involved here, and so that's why.
And the profit might be taken from them anyway.
And so that's why that's another piece where actually the government could just step in and say, I'm going to assume the risk. In fact, it's probably going to be a good business for me. So that's very interesting. Anything else that you think we should be highlighting here?
We managed to do all that without really saying many numbers besides 1.5 million or so people's electricity per reactor, 4 or 5, 6 million people's electricity per triplet of reactors that we're off. We haven't really said much about the equivalent energy in gas of those 6 reactors is about 10 billion cubic meters. So that's the energy that would need to either come from outside of Germany, would need to come from the gas, would need to come from the coal, would be about 10 billion cubic meters per year. Right. So that's about 20% of Nord Stream 1.
Sorry?
That's equivalent to about 20% of what Nord Stream 1 used to be.
Got it.
And in terms of money at today's prices, oh God, I would have to actually, the prices change in a day more than the total price was in the previous times. I would have to check. Oh, I mean, 10, just, I'm going to have to check it. And I hate being put on the spot with math, but I'm going to say about 10 billion, 20 billion euros a year of the equivalent of the energy from gas. I would have to redo those numbers on energy from coal. And then since some of that is going to be burning diesel at peak because you have less base load, I would have to check that too.
It's like we're talking about 10 zeros here.
But also it's got to be a lot bigger than those numbers indicate because it's pure loss and carbon penalties just exiting the German economy while then paying for it again in terms of your industrial customers having to like buy it and no longer being competitive.
Got it. So it's the electricity corresponding to 6 million Germans.
That's for a triplet of reactors, approximately. And when I say about 6 million, I mean household electricity demands. If you want to say how much for if you include those people's jobs and groceries and everything, the numbers start to move around a little bit, I suppose.
Okay. Got it. Okay, but I think we're talking about orders of magnitude, and so I think 6 million is relevant in absolute terms. In relative, that's about 7% of the population in Germany. And you're saying tens of billion, maybe 10 billion-ish euros, maybe more, maybe less, but that's kind of the orders of magnitude that we're talking about. You're also saying it's 20% of the Nord Stream gas, and so what does that correspond in terms of out of the if we say 100% of the Russian gas that Germany is currently slated to get, keeping them, if they were to close those 3 reactors, how would that affect that 100% say of gas?
Germany's gas that they're slated to get from Russia, first of all, that doesn't mean anything at this point because it doesn't matter what you're slated to get. Second of all, that gas flow has gone to almost nothing.
Yeah, which it's crazy because up to a few months ago, this was maybe a relevant
50%, 50-60%.
The discussion is very different, right? We're talking about the trade-off between German nuclear and Russian gas. But at this point, that's not even the right debate. The right debate is the trade-off between nuclear electricity and nothing.
Or nuclear electricity and losing one extra industry. The rumor from DC, the rumor from Berlin is that the government ministers are getting together to horse trade which industries to let go or not. And so they can't keep them all. They can't keep all the industries. They got to let some industries go. And they're looking at the amount of gas they have and the electricity and energy prices, how much subsidy they would need. And they're trying to figure out, triage style, which industries they lose forever.
So this is interesting. It deserves a minute of summary here, which is one of the big consumers of gas is actually industries, and industries usually that require a lot of heat, right? And so glass, for example, might be one of those. So chemicals might be another one. And so the idea there is you can import gas in a different way. Is in these finished products instead, right? Somebody else is going to burn the gas and then import those products. And so if you're going to do this, what you're stopping to do is producing these things in Germany and you're importing them. And so the question here that you're saying is that the state is saying is which ones of these industries that are consuming a lot of gas am I going to have to tell them I'm sorry, you don't get to produce this stuff anymore, and either you die or as a government I'm going to fund you to survive for this time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, but there's a complexity.
Yeah.
A lot of people are suffering from higher gas costs. If Germany could make it up by its superior abilities, extra subsidies, and cheaper electricity, maybe they could make it work. But then that brings back the nuclear. Companies are being cited insane gas and electricity quotas. As an example, I was in the UK for a wedding a few weeks ago, and I met a nice German senior businessman, right? He has a bunch of factories he has to take care of. He told me that his electricity quote from his electricity company, the electricity company said, here's our quote for you continuing on a contract. We're going to need to charge you about 20x. And we're going to need a massive upfront cash payment to make sure you can pay us. Or we recommend you just literally don't sign a contract, and if you don't end up buying electricity or can't afford it, you just shut down. This is what, and that's just one story. That's just from a few weeks ago. That's what industry around Germany is being told now. And let me tell you, Germany isn't powerful because of its blue water navy or because the incredible dominance of German media, culture, and food or any of that crap. They're strong because of their productivity. They're strong because of their industry, and they're strong because of the euro being strong when the euro is strong. And if those things go, we're going to see unexpected things, I suspect.
Mark, thank you so much for your time. This is way longer than I thought it would be, but very, very interesting. So I appreciate it. I'm going to try to get the Stillman argument on the other side. But in the meantime, thank you for your time. Please send me the link. I'm going to post the link on my article on this so that everybody can sign up. And then let's see how this evolves. And
certainly people can see a much tighter, fewer opinion report on our consulting website at Radiant Energy Group. We did sort of a pro bono report because we were getting so many good pieces of information from your site. Where is it? Oh, sure. RadiantEnergyGroup.com. And you just scroll to our recent reports and you'll find it. I didn't find it. I went there. All right. Yeah. Updates. Let me just, I can just send it to you on. Right. Yeah, I'll just send it to you after this. But people can find the report there. And it's got some cute little Tableau visualizations of the energy and the shutdown reactors and stuff. Sounds good. I look forward to it. Mark, thank you so much. All right.